Hi guys, Jonathan here again in the museum stores with a corker to show you. I mean, I always think they're corkers, but this is pretty wacky. So it's got a big old back end, as you can see, an odd looking pivot point there, lug here, and otherwise fairly conventional looking. Safe to call this a musket, I think. Might be a little short for the time. This is circa 1685. Now, rather than tell you what this is, let me demonstrate if I can. Come up to the camera. So there's a button here. This is a conventional flintlock with a button here. Press the button, and the butt drops down. And I think you can possibly start to see where this is going. Gently turn this around. Is that making any sense? Big old cup launcher. It is in fact a grenade launcher, but it's also a musket. So it shoots a bullet out of this end and a essentially cartoon fizzing bomb out of this end. I think you can already see the health and safety implications of this contrivance, but I will proceed nonetheless. So how does this actually work? Well, you obviously have to open the grenade launcher butt in the way that we've just done. I have to support that so it doesn't clack into itself. How do you fire it? Well, you have to switch fire using a little fence on the flash pan. This is extremely awkward. Let me put it on my shoulder. So we actually have a little gate here. I'll get you a close-up of it. That allows you to, well, it doesn't so much switch fire as it opens up the vent to the grenade launcher. Whereas when that is shut, hopefully, it seals it off. But it wouldn't matter in theory, as long as only one of these is loaded with powder and projectile/munition. At the time, it's not too important. So that's actually relatively crude, that system for switching the ignition. So, a fascinating idea. As you will know, I'm sure, the traditional way to do this, and this is really a naval thing. Perhaps they are at this time, 1680s, there are some land units still using grenade launchers, hand mortars, whatever you want to call them. In the decades following that, it becomes very much a naval weapon. I dare say they're a bit of a liability in land warfare, but we have very little historical information on how often they were used, how they were used. We know about grenadiers and hurling grenades, but even by the 1680s, they were not doing so much of that. So the only other feature on here that we need to talk about is this. So the ramrod has been moved to the left side of the gun, and sadly is missing from this example. I believe it's on our other example on display. And instead, this curious looking iron stake has been pivoted to the bottom of the gun. Why? Well, I think you can guess. So if we spin her around again. So just to be very clear, when firing like a musket, we are rather awkwardly shouldering it because it doesn't lend itself to normal use anymore with this massively swollen butt, if I can use that expression on the internet. I'm sure I can. Just let the cock down. And so, yeah, extremely awkward to shoulder. You can sort of get your head down on it for somewhat accurate fire for a musket. It even has a little brass front sight on it. To use it as a musket, you've got to spin this sucker around drop the butt down, which I won't do just for convenience while I'm trying to demonstrate this to you, and we drop down this rest, which is what this is. So this iron stake, we pivot down, and it has various different detent positions on it, which are now a little slack, but would have been quite robust when it was introduced. And there's even a little stake, a little stop on the stake, so it only goes so far into the ground, and you would sit this thing at this sort of angle, butt dropped, stake deployed, sitting on the ground like this. So used like a knee mortar or something. Absolutely fascinating thing. So the flintlock's acting backwards when you do that. Got to remember to flip your little gate open, otherwise it won't fire. And you've got to remember to have, ideally, you don't want to leave a charge in the musket barrel in case, I suppose the worst case is you're going to shoot a hole in the floor. Hopefully, nothing worse than that. We have to think here in terms of 17th century health and safety. So, but an absolutely fascinating piece. This one was made by James Peddle, whose name is on the lock plate. Rear of the lock plate there. Peddle was one of 3 makers here, recorded in the Board of Ordnance records, which have a minute referring to 3 different makers: a Collins Groom, a John Hartwell, and James Peddle, who made this one. Our other example of this was made by Hartwell. So these were ordnance gun makers. So this is an actual military weapon of the era. We don't know when it was used, to what extent it was used. I don't think we know how many were purchased, unfortunately. Perhaps we'll find out. James Peddle was a known maker of hand mortars, so the conventional version of this, where it's just a shoulder-fired, like a giant blunderbuss that fires grenades. He was making brass-barreled hand mortars along with other makers for the Board of Ordnance. We don't quite know whether this was strictly experimental or whether it saw any kind of widespread use. I don't think there's any evidence of that, but this is a genuine Board of Ordnance procured firearm. It has James II Royal Cipher on the lock plate, has all of the correct markings for a military arm of the period. So at the very least, they were trialing these things. So we do know a little bit about James Peddle, the maker of this thing. He became a gunmaker to the Ordnance, as in Board of Ordnance, in 1685 to 1717. That's the rough date of this for that reason. That's why we dated it to that. So 1685, 1687, something like that. He was also a gunmaker to the East India Company, the Hudson Bay Company, and the Royal African Company. These sort of very large, important corporate entities. The East India Company having its own very large armed forces as well. And he died in 1723. Thank you to Tom Del Mar, by the way, for conveniently putting all of that information into a catalogue description that I've just been referring to, because one of these was sold a few years ago, back in 2013, an identical one of these, with a much bigger loop on it, incidentally. I think we might be missing some sort of contraption on the front on this one, but nonetheless. So at least 3 of these are known to exist. Kind of fascinating to wonder to what use they might have been put. I suspect they were a trials thing. So I've called this a musket. It's not really a musket. It's quite short in the barrel and light in the barrel for a musket of the 1680s. And it is only .65 caliber, 65 caliber, which makes it, well, that's what would become carbine bore in the British Armed Forces. If you had this barrel in a normal gun stock, you'd probably call it a fusil. So something that an officer might buy, well, at this time, perhaps a fusee, which was a lightweight flintlock musket used by specialist troops. So it's not a conventional line infantry musket. But that would fit with arming of grenadiers, who were one of those elite units that used fusees. So at a time when the matchlock was still around, high-tech flintlock mechanism built-in grenade launcher. It's like the M16, M203 of its day, sort of. That would make sense. So someone is looking to arm grenadiers with an all-in-one weapon so they can carry on the traditional role of hurling bombs at the enemy, but also have the new modern lightweight fusee. This is clearly not lightweight because inevitably when you combine weapons together, that's even true of a 203 or an M16, the whole thing gets heavy, gets unbalanced. But yeah, great thing. Really like it. Thank you very much, as ever, for joining us. We do one of these every week. If you'd like to get ahead of the curve, go over to social media and have a go at guessing what next week's weapon is from the pictures that we provide. We're sometimes nice and sometimes we're a bit sneaky. My book on British bullpup firearms is now available from the Royal Armouries shop, as well as from Headstamp over in the US. So you can get it from either of those outlets, depending what's better for you on shipping. Do have a look at the description for links to that, but also links for donations if you'd rather donate to the Armouries. And I'm really very happy if you do either of those things. But I'm also happy if you just carry on watching what we do here, what we do on the GameSpot channel. And we also have a few collaborations with other channels. Most recently, the Real-Time History guys who are doing the Franco-Prussian War, which is really exciting. Thanks again, guys. Take care.